Mr. Sterling, I think you should see this.
Richard Sterling adjusted his designer suit as he strode with determined steps toward the main entrance of Union Trust Bank in Midtown Manhattan. His face, etched with years of hard-nosed decision-making, displayed the same frigid expression he'd perfected over decades at the helm of his company, Sterling Dynamics. Today he had a specific mission: to permanently close the bank account of Maria Johnson, the employee he had fired just hours before. The decision had been swift and absolute. Maria, a woman with delicate features and an always kind smile, had worked for his company for many years as the head of human resources. But when the numbers didn't align in the last quarter, Richard didn't hesitate to point her out as the culprit. Errors in payroll, discrepancies in financial reports, everything seemed to point to her. Without a deeper investigation, without giving her a chance to defend herself, he had dismissed her on the spot. Now, as he pushed through the glass doors of the bank, Richard felt satisfied with his action. He was a man who wouldn't tolerate incompetence, much less dishonesty. His company had grown under his firm hand precisely because he never allowed personal feelings or considerations to interfere with business. The bank's interior was calm that morning. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, creating golden patterns on the polished marble floor. Richard headed straight to the customer service area, where he requested to speak with the branch manager. His reputation preceded him, and it wasn't long before Mr. Peterson, a middle-aged man in glasses who knew Richard well from his many corporate transactions, attended to him. "Mr. Sterling, what an honor to have you here. How might I assist you today?" the manager asked with a professional smile. "I'm here to close the account of a former employee," Richard replied dryly, handing over the documents he had prepared. "Maria Johnson was terminated for financial irregularities, and I want to ensure she no longer has access to any company benefits." The manager took the papers and reviewed them carefully. "Allow me to verify the information in our system," he said, turning to his computer. Richard waited, impatiently tapping his fingers on the marble counter. After several minutes of typing and screen review, the manager's face changed. His professional expression morphed into one of confusion, then surprise, and finally something akin to astonishment. "Mr. Sterling," he said slowly, turning the screen toward him, "I think you should see this." Richard leaned forward, expecting to find confirmation of the irregularities he had suspected, but what he saw on the screen left him completely paralyzed. His eyes widened as he processed the information before him. The bank records showed a series of transfers Maria had been making for years, but they weren't suspicious or fraudulent transfers as Richard had assumed. They were regular, constant deposits made not to her own account, but to an account in the name of Richard Sterling. "I don't understand," Richard murmured, feeling as though the floor were shifting beneath his feet. "What are these transfers?" The manager adjusted his glasses and pointed to the screen. "According to the records, Ms. Johnson has been depositing a portion of her salary monthly into a special account. Look at the transaction descriptions." Richard read the lines the manager indicated, and each word felt like a blow to his conscience. The deposits were labeled Sterling Family Medical Fund, Specialist Treatment, Urgent Hospital Bills, Family Health Fund. "Family Medical Fund?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Sterling," the manager said softly, "were you not aware of these deposits? As I see here, they began many years ago, right after you mentioned at the company that your father was ill and needed expensive treatment that insurance didn't fully cover." Memories flooded Richard's mind like an avalanche. His father, an elderly man who had worked his whole life as a carpenter, had been diagnosed with a severe illness requiring extremely costly medication. Richard remembered complaining aloud in the office about the peace, about the unfairness of the healthcare system, and how even as a successful businessman, these expenses were a significant burden. But he never, ever imagined someone had been listening and acting upon it. "How much money has she deposited?" Richard asked, dreading the answer. The manager ran some quick calculations. In total, over all these years, the sum amounts to a considerable figure. She has systematically set aside between 10 and 15% of her monthly salary for this fund. Richard slumped into the chair behind him. The world seemed to have turned upside down. The woman he had fired that morning, whom he had accused of dishonesty, had been sacrificing a significant portion of her own income to help with his father's medical expenses. There's more, the manager continued, seemingly oblivious to the shock he had inflicted. I also see here that she authorized any interest generated by these deposits to be directly transferred to cover additional expenses. And look at this. The manager pointed to another series of transactions. There are also deposits labeled Sterling Family Emergency, which coincide with the dates your father was urgently hospitalized. Richard put his hands to his face. He remembered those emergency hospitalizations. He recalled the panic of receiving late-night calls, the desperation of rushing to the hospital, unsure if his father would be all right. He also remembered how expenses always mysteriously seemed lower than expected, how the hospital would inform him that a portion of the bills had already been covered by an anonymous benefactor. Why would she do this? Richard murmured, more to himself than to the manager. Why didn't she ever tell me? The manager gently closed the computer screen. Mr. Sterling, I have worked at this bank for many years and have seen all kinds of transactions, but rarely have I witnessed something so selfless. Ms. Johnson always came in personally to make these deposits, and always with the same instruction, that they be completely anonymous. Anonymous? Yes, she specifically requested that you never be informed of the source of these funds. She said she didn't want you to feel obligated or uncomfortable. She just wanted to help because she considered you a good boss and a good person going through a tough time. Richard felt tears welling up, something that hadn't happened in decades. Everything he thought he knew about Maria, everything he had assumed about her character, her motivations, had been completely wrong. Mr. Sterling, the manager continued, is there anything else I should know? The supposed payroll errors that led to her termination. May I ask exactly what kind of discrepancy you found? Richard pulled out his phone and checked the emails he'd received from his accounting department. Unauthorized transfers, discrepancies in salary amounts, expenses that didn't match approved budgets. The manager nodded slowly. Allow me to show you one more thing. He reopened the computer and navigated to another section. Look at these dates and compare them with the discrepancies you mentioned. Richard looked at the screen and felt another physical jolt. The dates of Maria's transfers to the medical fund matched exactly with the dates of the supposed irregularities he had found in the company's books. She was transferring money from her salary to your account, the manager explained, but she did it in such a way that it wouldn't appear as a favor or direct aid. She likely manipulated internal records to make them look like normal business expenses to protect your pride and her privacy. The realization hit Richard like a tsunami. Maria hadn't been stealing money from the company. She had been donating her own money and had found a discreet way to do so that wouldn't compromise her position or Richard's dignity as the recipient of the aid. The errors he had interpreted as signs of incompetence or dishonesty were actually evidence of extraordinary generosity and emotional delicacy that he had been utterly incapable of recognizing. Where is she now? Richard asked, his voice trembling. I don't know, Mr. Sterling, but if I may offer a suggestion, I think you should speak with her as soon as possible. Richard rose from the chair on shaky legs. His world had completely changed in the span of an hour. The woman he had unjustly fired was not only innocent of any wrongdoing, but she had been a secret guardian angel for years, sacrificing her own financial comfort to help his family in their time of need. As he walked out of the bank, Richard knew he had a far more important mission than closing a bank account. He had to find Maria Johnson. He had to apologize, and he had to find a way to repair the damage he had caused with his rash judgment and lack of faith in one of the most noble people he had ever known. The truth had been revealed, but now the hardest part began. Facing the consequences of his actions and finding a way to mend a mistake that could have destroyed the life of an extraordinary woman. Chapter 2, The Apology. Richard drove through the city streets with trembling hands on the steering wheel. His mind couldn't fully process what he had discovered at the bank. Every red light gave him more time to reflect on the magnitude of his error, and each reflection sank him deeper into an ocean of remorse. Maria Johnson lived in a modest neighborhood across town. Richard had only been there once for a company Christmas party she had hosted at her home for employees who didn't have family nearby. He remembered the warmth of that house, the way Maria had prepared food for everyone, how she had made every person feel special and welcome. Arriving in front of the small two-story house with a carefully maintained garden, Richard sat in his car for several minutes, gathering the courage to knock. How could he face the woman he had treated so unjustly? What words could be enough to express his regret? Finally, he took a deep breath and got out of the car. His steps toward the front door felt like the longest of his life. Before he could knock, he heard a familiar voice speaking inside the house. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll find another job. I have experience and good references from past work." Maria's voice sounded forcibly optimistic, but Richard could detect the underlying strain. He knocked softly and the sound of conversation immediately ceased. Who could that be at this hour? He heard an older voice murmur, Maria's mother, likely. When the door opened, Maria appeared before him with an expression of complete shock. She wore casual clothes, her hair in a simple ponytail, and her eyes showed signs of having cried recently. Despite everything, she was still beautiful, with that natural beauty that comes from a kind soul. "Mr. Sterling," she murmured, clearly surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Maria, I need to talk to you, please." His voice sounded different, more humble, devoid of the cold authority that usually characterized it. Maria hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. "Please come in." The interior of the house was just as Richard remembered, cozy, clean, filled with family photographs and small details that spoke of the love and care Maria put into everything she did. On the sofa sat an older woman with delicate features and silver hair, clearly Maria's mother. "Mom, this is Richard Sterling, my former boss," Maria explained with some discomfort. The woman stood up with a polite but cautious smile. "It's a pleasure, Mr. Sterling. I'm Esperanza Johnson." "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Johnson," Richard replied, feeling small under the older woman's gentle yet penetrating gaze. "Would you like something to drink?" "Coffee, perhaps?" Maria offered, maintaining formalities despite the awkward situation. "No, thank you. I actually came because I made a terrible mistake, Maria. A mistake I need to correct." Maria exchanged a look with her mother. "A mistake? I don't understand." Richard took a deep breath. "I went to the bank today to close your company benefits account. I thought it was the right thing to do after what had happened." Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. Her mother moved closer and placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "But the manager showed me something," Richard continued, his voice breaking slightly. "He showed me what you had been doing all these years. The deposits, the medical fund for my father." Maria's face went completely pale. "He shouldn't have told you. I specifically asked for it to be confidential." "Why am I so mocked?" Richard asked, taking a step toward her. "Why did you do it? Why did you sacrifice your own money to help my family?" Esperanza looked at her daughter with pride and understanding. Clearly, she knew Maria's secret. "Because you're a good person, Mr. Sterling," Maria replied simply. "I saw how you suffered when your father became ill. I saw how you worried about him, how you stayed up late looking for ways to afford the treatment. You had always been fair to me. You gave me opportunities when others wouldn't have. It was the least I could do." "The least?" Richard felt overwhelmed with emotion. "Maria, you donated years of your own income. You sacrificed yourself financially to help someone who unjustly fired you today." "You didn't know," Maria said softly. "And I made sure you didn't know. I didn't want you to feel obligated to me or to think I expected anything in return. But the errors in the accounting books, I caused them," Maria admitted. "I found ways to transfer the money that wouldn't show up as direct donations. I wanted to protect your pride in my job. I thought it would never be discovered, and that if it was, I could explain it without involving your personal matters." Richard sank into a chair. "Oh my God, I fired you because you were helping me. I accused you of dishonesty when you were the most honest person I've ever known." Esperanza spoke for the first time since the introductions. "Mr. Sterling, my daughter cried all morning, not because she lost her job, but because she thought you had lost faith in her. That hurt her more than any termination." "Mom," Maria murmured, clearly uncomfortable with the revelation. "No, honey, he needs to know. He needs to know that your greatest fear wasn't being unemployed, but disappointing someone you respect." Richard abruptly stood up. "Maria, I came to ask for your forgiveness. But more than that, I came to ask you to come back, not just to your job. I need you to help me become the kind of person you believed I was. Maria looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? I mean that for years I've run my company with an iron fist, making quick decisions, judging people without giving them a chance to explain themselves. Today I realize that my way of leading is completely wrong. He stepped toward her, his eyes filled with a sincerity Maria had never seen before. You saw kindness in me that I didn't even know myself. You believed in me when I didn't believe in you. I want to learn to be the man you thought I was. Maria exchanged a long look with her mother. Esperanza nodded almost imperceptibly. Mr. Sterling, Maria began slowly, if I am going to come back, things have to change, not just for me, but for all the employees. Tell me what needs to change. First, I want you to investigate before judging. Every person deserves a chance to explain their side of the story. Richard nodded vigorously. You're right, completely. Second, I want us to establish a system of open communication in the company. Employees need to feel they can talk to you without fear of unjust retaliation. Done. And third, Maria hesitated for a moment, I want you to return all the money I deposited for your father. Richard looked at her, confused. Why? That money helped save my father's life. Because I want to donate it to the hospital where he was treated so they can help other families who can't afford the treatments. But I want the donation to come from you, not me. Maria's generosity left Richard speechless once again. Even at this moment, when he had come to apologize to her, Maria was thinking about how to help others. Maria, Richard said, his voice trembling. How is it possible that someone like you exists? Esperanza smiled from her place on the sofa. She learned from her father. He was a carpenter, like your father, and he always said that the hands that build must have a heart that loves. Your father was a carpenter? Richard asked, struck by the coincidence. Yes, he died when I was young, but he taught me that true work isn't just what you do to earn money, but how you use your skills to do good in the world. Richard felt a deep connection with Maria that went beyond the employer-employee relationship. Both had been shaped by hardworking, honorable parents who understood the value of hard work and human dignity. There's something else I need to tell you, Richard said. My father, he passed away last week. Maria's eyes immediately filled with tears. Oh, Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry. Why didn't you tell me? Because I've been so focused on blaming others for my problems that I forgot how to connect with the people who truly matter. Maria approached him, and without thinking, she took Richard's hands. Your father had a long life, thanks in part to the treatments he was able to receive. That's what matters. Yes, but he also had a long life because someone extraordinary cared enough to help a stranger without asking for anything in return. Esperanza stood up from the sofa. I think I'll make coffee after all. This conversation deserves it. As Esperanza headed to the kitchen, Richard and Maria were left alone in the living room. The weight of all that had happened hung in the air between them. Maria, there's something else I want to ask you, Richard said. I want you to be more than my head of human resources. I want you to be my partner in changing the entire culture of the company. Partner? Yes, I want to offer you a share in the company, not as payment for what you did for my father, but because I've realized I need someone like you guiding me to make the right decisions. Maria was speechless. The offer was generous beyond her most ambitious dreams. But there's one condition, Richard continued, which is that you promise me you'll never do anything like that in secret again. If you see someone needs help, you tell me. Let's work together to find ways to help that don't require you to sacrifice your own well-being. Maria smiled for the first time since Richard had arrived. It was a genuine smile, full of hope and possibility. Deal, she said, extending her hand. When Richard took her hand to seal the agreement, he felt he was not only starting a new business partnership, but also a friendship that had been born from the ashes of a misunderstanding and strengthened through truth and mutual forgiveness. Esperanza returned with the coffee, and the three spent the next hour talking about plans for the company, ways to honor Richard's father's memory, and how to build a workplace where trust and communication were as important as profits. As Richard prepared to leave, he knew his life had irreversibly changed. He had arrived at that house to close a chapter of error and guilt, but he was leaving with a new chapter of hope, collaboration, and purpose. Chapter 3, Building a New Legacy. The following months brought extraordinary changes for both Richard and Maria. Sterling Dynamics, which had once operated under a model of rigid authority and one-way communication, gradually transformed into a place where employees felt valued and heard. Maria returned not only as Director of Human Resources, but as a minority partner in the company, with a stake Richard had insisted on granting her. Together, they implemented a series of reforms that revolutionized the corporate culture. They established open weekly meetings where any employee could express concerns directly to management. They created an emergency fund to assist employees in financial crises. And most importantly, they instituted a research before judgment policy that required any disciplinary decision to be preceded by a thorough investigation and an opportunity for the affected person to present their side of the story. The most significant change, however, was in Richard himself. The man who once made hasty decisions based on assumptions now consulted, listened, and reflected before acting. Maria had become not only his business partner, but his moral compass, the voice of conscience that helped him navigate complex situations with wisdom and compassion. One day, while reviewing the quarterly reports in the office they now shared, Maria noticed Richard seemed distant, lost in thoughts that clearly troubled him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, closing her laptop and giving him her full attention. Richard sighed deeply. "I'm thinking about my father. Today is exactly 1 year since his death." Maria got up from her desk and walked to the window where Richard was standing, looking out over the city skyline. "How are you feeling?" "Grateful," he replied after a pause. "Grateful for the extra time we had because of you, but also regretful." "Regretful of what?" "Of not being a better son while he was alive. Of being so obsessed with work that I missed so many opportunities to just be with him." Maria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Richard, your father knew you loved him, and I'm sure he'd be proud of the man you've become." "You think so?" "I know so. I've seen how you've changed, how you've learned to truly see people. That's not something you can fake." Richard turned to her, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "Maria, there's something I've wanted to tell you for months, but I haven't found the right words. You didn't just save my father's life with your generosity. You saved me too. You saved me from becoming a completely empty man, from losing my humanity in the pursuit of success." Maria smiled softly. "You already had that humanity inside you, Richard. You just needed a reminder of where you'd put it." At that moment, Richard's secretary knocked and entered with an expression of urgency. "Excuse the interruption, but there's a situation that requires immediate attention." "What is it, Carmen?" Richard asked. "It's about Javier Sanchez from the accounting department. It seems he's been manipulating company expense figures." The auditor found significant discrepancies. Richard and Maria exchanged a look. This was exactly the kind of situation that, in the past, would have resulted in immediate termination without investigation. But now things were different. "Where is Javier now?" Maria asked. "In his office. The other employees are very nervous. Everyone knows what happened." "All right," Richard said. "Tell Javier we want to speak with him in the conference room in 10 minutes. And Carmen, make sure he knows this is a conversation, not a judgment." "Understood, sir." When Carmen left, Richard looked at Maria. "What do you think?" "I think this is our first real test. We're going to find out what's going on before we assume anything." 10 minutes later, Javier Sanchez entered the conference room. He was a middle-aged man with a wife and 2 young children who had worked at the company for many years. His face showed a mixture of terror and resignation. "Javier, please sit down," Maria said calmly. "We want to understand what's happening with the discrepancies in the accounting books." Javier slumped into the chair, his shoulders trembling. "I know you're going to fire me. Just please give me some time to find another job before you make it official. My kids." "Javier," Richard interrupted gently, "no one has said anything about firing you. First, we want to hear your side of the story." The man looked up, surprised. "My side?" "Yes. Explain to us what's been happening." Javier took a deep breath, tears starting to well up in his eyes. "My youngest son, Miguel, has a special medical condition. He needs very expensive therapies that our insurance doesn't fully cover. I was desperate. So, were you taking money from the company? Maria asked without accusation in her voice, only seeking clarity. Not exactly, Javier replied. I was reorganizing expenses. When there were leftover budgets at the end of the month, I transferred them to categories that allowed me to justify reimbursements for family medical expenses. Technically, it wasn't stealing, but I know it wasn't right either. Richard leaned forward. How much money have you taken in total? About $3,000 over the last 6 months. I have documents for all the real medical expenses. I never used the money for anything else. Maria and Richard looked at each other. Javier's story resonated with their own recent experience. A desperate employee doing something ethically questionable to help his family. Javier, Maria said, why didn't you come talk to us about your son's situation? Why? Because I thought you would say it wasn't the company's problem, that family issues should be handled outside of work. Richard felt a pang of pain. That answer reflected exactly the kind of boss he had been in the past, the kind of cold corporate environment he had created. Javier, we're going to resolve this, Richard said firmly. First, I want you to know your job is safe. Second, we're going to establish a payment plan so you can repay the money you took, but in installments that won't compromise your son's treatment. Javier's eyes widened in disbelief. Seriously? And third, Maria continued, we're going to review our employee medical benefits policies. Clearly, if we have employees who feel forced to do this, it's because our support system isn't sufficient. I can't believe it, Javier murmured. I thought my career was over. Your career is fine, Richard said, but we need you to understand that in the future, if you have a family crisis, we want you to come to us first. We are a team, and teams support each other. After Javier left, clearly relieved and grateful, Maria and Richard were left alone in the conference room. How do I feel so good about not firing someone who technically stole money from the company? Richard asked, laughing softly. Because you're learning that complex situations require complex solutions, not simple decisions, Maria replied. And because you're starting to see people as complete human beings, not just as employees. Chapter 4, The Path to Love. The following months brought more positive changes. The company implemented an expanded medical assistance program for employees' families. It established a no-interest emergency loan fund and created a mentorship system where experienced employees help new workers not only professionally, but also navigate difficult personal situations. The transformation did not go unnoticed in the industry. Other companies began to study Richard and Maria's model, inviting them to share their experiences at conferences and business seminars. But what made them most proud were the personal stories of employees whose lives had improved thanks to the new company culture. One day, while walking through the office after a particularly productive team meeting, Maria noticed Richard seemed happier and more relaxed than she had ever seen him. You know what's the strangest thing about all this? Richard said. What? Our productivity has increased by 30% since we implemented all these changes. It turns out that when people feel valued and secure, they work better. Are you surprised? Honestly, yes. My whole career, I thought productivity came from pressure and fear. It never occurred to me that it could come from love and respect. Maria stopped in the middle of the hallway. You just used the word love in a business context. Richard laughed. I guess I did, and you know what? I don't regret it. That afternoon, Richard decided to do something he had been putting off for months. He drove to the cemetery where his father was buried and sat by the grave, something he hadn't done since the funeral. Dad, he began, his voice barely a whisper. I wanted to tell you about the things that have changed. I met an incredible person, a woman who helped me remember who I really am. She taught me that true success isn't measured in money, but in how many lives you can touch positively. The gentle wind rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, creating a natural melody that seemed like a response. I know you always wanted me to be successful, but I also know you wanted me to be good. I think I'm finally learning to do both. Richard stayed there for an hour, talking to his father about Maria, the change in the company, the employees who now trusted him, and whom he trusted in return. For the first time since his father's death, he felt at peace. When he returned to the office, he found Maria finishing some reports. The building was mostly empty, illuminated only by the security lights and the golden glow of the sunset filtering through the windows. "How was your visit?" Maria asked without looking up from her papers. "Necessary," Richard replied. "Maria, there's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time." She looked up now, giving him her full attention. "Tell me, why did you really decide to help my family? And don't tell me it was just because you thought I was a good person. There must have been something more." Maria put down her pen and leaned back in her chair. "Do you really want to know?" "Yes, because I saw my father in you." Richard frowned, confused. "Your father?" "My father was a carpenter like yours, and like yours, he was a hard-working man who sacrificed for his family. But more than that, I saw in you the way my father used to talk about his work with pride, but also with the burden of knowing he was responsible for the well-being of others." Maria stood up and walked toward the window. "When you mentioned your father's medical expenses, the frustration in your voice was the same I heard in my father's voice when he became ill. The helplessness of wanting to do more but feeling like circumstances were out of your control. You never told me your father had been sick. He died when I was young, but I remember how my mother sacrificed to pay for his treatments. I remember the anguish of not being able to do more. When I saw you had that same anguish, I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Richard approached her. "So you helped me because you saw someone you knew and loved in me. I helped you because I recognized in you the capacity for deep love, even when you didn't know how to express it." At that moment, Richard realized something that had been growing in his heart for months, but which he hadn't had the courage to acknowledge. His feelings for Maria had evolved beyond gratitude, beyond friendship, beyond even business partnership. "Maria, he said softly, do you think it's possible for two people who started as boss and employee to become something more?" Maria turned to him, her eyes shining with a mixture of surprise and something deeper. "What do you mean?" "I mean that at some point during these months, I fell in love with you. Not with your generosity, not with your business acumen, although I love those things too. I fell in love with who you are as a person, Maria." She remained silent for a moment that felt eternal. Then she slowly smiled. "Richard, do you know when I knew you had truly changed?" "When?" "The day you went to visit your father's grave and came back with peace in your eyes instead of guilt. That day I realized that the man I had been falling in love with had finally learned to love himself." "You had been falling in love with me?" "I fell in love with the man I saw in moments of vulnerability, when you talked about your father, when you genuinely cared about something other than business. I fell in love with the man who existed beneath all that corporate armor. And now," she said, taking his hands, "now I'm in love with the complete man, the one who learned that true strength comes from gentleness, that true success comes from lifting others, that true love comes from seeing people as they really are." They kissed softly as the sun set behind them, bathing the office in a golden light that seemed to bless the new chapter beginning in their lives. Epilogue: The Legacy of Crossroads of Fate. 6 months later, Richard and Maria were married in a simple but beautiful ceremony in the garden of the house where he had gone to apologize that fateful day. Esperanza, Maria's mother, performed the ceremony, and all the company employees were present, not as workers compelled to attend, but as an extended family, celebrating the love of two people who had learned that business and humanity could not only coexist but strengthen each other. The company continued to thrive under their joint leadership. They established a mentorship program that helped other companies implement more humane corporate cultures. They created a foundation in Richard's father's memory that provided medical assistance to working families across the city. And most importantly, they demonstrated day after day that successful business and human decency were not only compatible, but mutually reinforcing. 5 years had passed since that morning Richard Sterling walked into the bank with the intention of closing an account and walked out with a completely transformed heart. In the office they shared, Maria sat by the window, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. Richard, after so many years of giving without asking for anything in return, had finally learned to receive love, support, and the promise of a family of his own. The building now radiated a different energy, a warmth that could be felt from the moment one crossed the main doors. Decisions were made with the heart as much as with the mind, and every policy was evaluated not only for its impact on profits, but for its effect on the human lives it touched. Do you know what's the most incredible thing about all this? Richard said, sitting beside her. What? That it began with such a huge misunderstanding, but ended up creating something so beautiful. Our story is going to be very interesting to tell, Maria said, feeling a small kick. The best part is that it's still being written, and I have a feeling the best chapters are yet to come. Richard put his hand on her belly, feeling the movement of their unborn child. Hello, little one, he whispered. Your mom and I have prepared a special world for you, a world where love and business go hand in hand, where people are more important than profits, and where every day is an opportunity to do good. The story had begun with an arrogant CEO unjustly firing a noble employee, but had evolved into a tale of redemption, true love, and living proof that people can change, hearts can heal, and sometimes the most beautiful endings are born from the most painful beginnings. I hope you enjoyed this story. Now, if you love my narratives, you'll surely love my new channel of prayer. Prayers with Alex. Come with me to praise God with prayers full of faith every morning and every night. The link is right up here in the card and also in the pinned comment. I'll see you there with all my heart. Also, I'd love to know what you thought of this story. Tell me in the comments. And now another exciting video is appearing on your screen that will surely surprise you. Tap to keep getting emotional with stories that touch the soul. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Crossroads of Fate to never miss a new story. I'll see you there. Yeah.